house in Boulder on our Facebook Live. I do have my ho-ho hat on, and it is Festivus season around here, so it's not really a Santa hat. It's more of a Festivus hat. Luke Jones joins us now live via satellite on the backside of all things Santa Claus, and a rather benign victory over the Indianapolis Colts over the weekend. But, Luke, as I sat around on Sunday and watched other teams have to go out there, as well as on Monday night, I know the Steelers made pretty quick work of the Houston Texans as well. Never easy to win games, even in Week 16 and 17. A lot of guys out there playing for tape, a lot of guys trying, a lot of guys wanting to be the hero.
Yeah, this is always an interesting time of year. I mean, you have your teams obviously trying to lock up playoff spots. Some teams did that. Some teams locked up a first-round bye. The Eagles on Monday night, despite a really choppy, ugly effort against an Oakland team that's out of it, they clinch home field advantage throughout in the NFC. So you have all that going on, but then you also have the teams that are just played out the string. You have a team in the Cleveland Browns who locked up the number 1 pick overall for the second straight year. I mean,
you got a lot of teams playing to lock up the death of their coach as the head coach too, right?
Oh yeah, no question. I mean, even the team that's going to be coming to Baltimore on Sunday. I mean, the Cincinnati Bengals.
We've had 3 in a row when you think about it, right? Like literally, like Chuck's going to go, Hugh Jackson's going to go. I mean, every week we've seen a coach here. O'Brien a couple weeks. We're going to see a lot of coaches in the last 5 weeks that are going to get fired.
Yeah, and it really does speak to how fortunate the Ravens have been from a scheduling standpoint. It's impossible to dismiss that. They shouldn't apologize for it, but it does certainly remind you of, for everything you can talk about with the Ravens that should be better, needs to be better, things that they can certainly address in the offseason, building up the offense more, all of that. You look at them and say, okay, well, they're 9-6. I don't know how great they are necessarily, but chances are, assuming they either win or Buffalo loses or Tennessee loses next Sunday, they're going to be in the playoffs, and you'll surely take that over the alternative of talking about your head coach being fired, because that means you don't have a chance in Week 17. So, yeah, just offer some perspective, and going to be another unique week coming up here with the Bengals, who are coming off a pretty nice win over a Lions team that was still in the playoff hunt. That's a team that's still capable of playing some decent football at times. It hasn't happened nearly as often as they've needed it to this year, but we know the Ravens' history against the Bengals, some of the struggles they've had over the last 3 or 4 years. So
far more dangerous team than I think the team we've seen the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think that's obvious. I mean, any team that has A.J. Green, any team that has, and I kind of sound silly saying this, Andy Dalton, but when it's Andy Dalton compared to some of the backup quarterbacks the Ravens have played over the last 7 or 8 weeks, that's a different animal.
Hey, Andy Dalton could say the same thing as Joe Flacco. We won a lot of games around here, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's not a great quarterback, but he's a guy who has taken his team to the playoffs a number of times. So, that's not to say Ravens fans should be scared per se, or the Ravens should be scared per se, but just really reemphasizes what we said talking about Saturday's performance against Indy. Ravens need to play a much more complete game than we saw this past week, that's for sure.
All right, well, obviously the biggest story over the weekend came late into the night, into Christmas Day, when the Ravens' schedule was flexed out to a 4:25 game. I know why they do this. I could explain this, but let me just lay it at your feet for anybody that's pissed off, because I know everybody's pissed off at the Ravens. I've been writing about the ghost of Ravens, past, present, and future, and I'll be reading that on the air here this week for anybody who has not seen it, read it. They are my words. It is my feelings. It is my history. I got 50 years of vested interest in this. To see what's happened to the season this year based off of the knee and the bad vibes of the fans, but the latest bad vibe is 425, and obviously getting all these teams to play simultaneously, a Ravens fan would then say to you, Luke, all right, I got to go down there at 425. It's wrecked my New Year's Eve. I can't take my wife out to dinner. Whatever, kids, whatever the family thing is you do on New Year's Eve, everybody's off on Monday, so it's not about traffic or getting home or, hell, you've spent $200, $300, $400 on the Ravens tickets. It's the biggest game of the year. It's essentially a playoff game, winning in. So, as someone wrote on my Facebook, They would love to have this problem in Cleveland right now, to be playing the 4 o'clock game, or in Detroit, or in Indianapolis, or the Jets, or the Redskins, or any of these woebegone franchises that, God forbid, they should have to move their game to 4:25 on New Year's Eve. But all that being said, there's going to be scoreboard watching here because you win and you're in, but lose and scoreboard watch. So run me through the scoreboard possibilities here of how many 9 and 7 dregs could be chasing them down the line if somehow they're losing 21-16 in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that the league's been able to do for a number of years now with the flex scheduling. We've talked about it. I mean, the Ravens have been flexed into Sunday Night Football. They've been flexed out of Sunday Night Football. And when you think of the flex scheduling, you always think about that game, but it goes beyond that. They've had games moved to 4:25 or 4:15 or whatever the late time slot was nationally in a given season. And they've also had games moved up before. So I think the real rub here, and if you're the NFL, it's the matter of acknowledging that it's a holiday, and it is a day when a lot of people are moving. And look, I mean, I know some people have labeled it first world problems. It is. I mean, this isn't some hardship that is over the top as far as how bad it is, but it is one of those things that the league does that reemphasizes that they don't care about people that go to the games. It's all TV driven. I mean, there's no question about that. So I understand people not liking it. That's certainly understandable when you've been down to the Inner Harbor on New Year's Eve and you know what kind of traffic that can be and how logistically that could be an issue. But that said, the league has done this. I'm not surprised. I mean, short of making a concession that says we're not going to flex in a year when an NFL Sunday is on New Year's Eve, we should have seen it coming otherwise. So from that perspective, I mean, the Ravens, we've talked about it. They don't have to do any scoreboard watching unless they go out and they're not playing good football on Sunday. And in that case, they're going to be looking to see what happens with Buffalo as they're playing the Miami Dolphins. They're going to be looking to see what happens with Tennessee as they're hosting a Jacksonville team that now has nothing to play for from a perspective of being able to secure a bye because Pittsburgh locked that up on Christmas Day. So, it's good from a TV viewing standpoint, but again, this goes back to the fans that actually go to the games, the fans that make a steeper financial investment to be a season ticket holder, understanding that this has been a reality and a possibility for a number of years now, but it just reminds you of the league not really caring whatsoever about those fans that are in the seats for games. And
well, I could go through this, with the Terps who never tell you when they're playing or any other college team. Baseball that, rearranges game times on 24 hours notice in the playoffs for these games 4s and 5s in these first-round series when they don't know who's playing or where, who's still going to be alive or not. And, we go back to if they were to have won the division, you wouldn't know whether they're playing Saturday or Sunday next weekend. And we know that right now. I mean, I have a flight to Kansas City. I have a flight to Jacksonville. I don't have a flight to Nashville. I don't think they're going to go to Nashville. So, at this point, I don't know when they're playing or who or whatever. And that's kind of the way it works. I mean, bitching about this feels like the eternal struggle now that everybody has to find a reason to hate the Ravens because they took a knee in London. I'm kind of floored by it, honestly, Luke, over the last 12 weeks as to when the season began. You and I got on a plane for London. The team got off to a good start, won a couple of games, pitched a shutout. There was this whole notion that, wow, if we could be playing the Bengals on New Year's Eve and they had to flex the game to 4:25, and if we win, we're in, and we get to go to some lowly Jacksonville or Kansas City dreg 10-6, 11-5 team that probably doesn't deserve to be there, that we would have an opportunity to win a playoff game. I think everybody would have been down with that. But, 'tis the season to shoot at the Ravens, right? To hate the stuff you used to love, and you're not even sure why. But it really is bizarre to sit in that stadium week after week and see 20,000 empty seats. I mean, it's I don't. It's sort of otherworldly to me from what we know here for 22 years. It's one thing for maybe it not to be as loud. Maybe there's some no-shows. Maybe some people are pissed off about moving the game, or maybe you couldn't. Maybe it's a holiday or it's a night game and you don't want to come downtown and the crime. I'll hear all that, but it's like every game's a preseason game all of a sudden. It's really weird, man.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but this isn't a Ravens issue.
It isn't.
Kansas City, Arrowhead Stadium. I mean, that Kansas City has long had a reputation for being one of the better fan bases in the NFL, considering the Chiefs have never won a Super Bowl. I mean, we're not talking about a team, or they haven't won. This isn't a team that's won anything in a long
The Lions
long time.
build their whole life around Thanksgiving, and they've never won a Super Bowl.
Right. I mean, so this is a case of Tennessee, a team that was playing a red-hot Rams team, a team that was trying to improve its playoff position and clinch, and they had a lot of empty seats. And I'm not saying Nashville has a great tradition, but they certainly supported the Titans when they've been good in the past. So I mean, this isn't something that's unique to the Ravens. I'm more empathetic because it is a holiday, and we saw this with the college football playoff. When that game has been on New Year's Eve during the week, when they're starting the first semifinal game at 4:00 in the afternoon on New Year's Eve, where there's a case where even from a TV standpoint, you're telling your fans you don't care. So I get it to a point. I mean, I hear what you're saying. Certainly the Ravens have their issues, and the knee is part of that, but a lot of this goes back to the NFL in general. It really does, and you and I, we cited the Mark Cuban comments from, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. We talked about that a few weeks ago, about the whole pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. I think a lot of this is just people are really kind of getting sick of the NFL, and the catch rule, different things like that. I mean, we had another situation where Buffalo, who's in a competitive game against New England.
Every week. You can't take a week off from it, can you, right?
I mean, Kelvin Benjamin, anyone who saw that.
Well, the game's about throwing the ball and catching it at this point, and they throw the ball 50 times a game, right? So each team. So, there's 80 or 90 possibilities a game times 16 games a week where, at some point a touchdown's going to be in dispute, literally, right?
Yeah, but it's just one of those things where there was a case where Buffalo, and look, I mean, the Ravens fans weren't rooting for the Bills, but there wasn't really anything that that the Bills could have won, and the Ravens would have been in serious trouble. But there was a case where Kelvin Benjamin makes a touchdown reception, a terrific catch in the back corner of the end zone. It looks like a touchdown. Nothing about the replay suggests that there was anything indisputable, clear, obvious to overturn it, and it's overturned in New York. I mean, it's just, when those things continue to happen, you really start to question the integrity of the product when you see calls like that. Now, I know the Pittsburgh one against New England, that one, if you're really following the rule, that was interpreted correctly. But this was a case where I don't know how anyone could look at that and say, oh, that's not a touchdown. No, it was really close. But I don't know how you look at that on replay and say that should be overturned. So my point is, and I'm not saying that's the biggest issue that plagues the league, but it's one of many issues that, frankly, fans are really tired of and really not liking. And I think you're seeing, after years and years of this, you're seeing a lot of pushback, not just in Baltimore, but around the league.
And it can only get so big, right? I mean, to talk about it on a global scale, to say during your lifetime, your arc from caring about football as a kid whose dad lost his team, to playing a little bit of Little League in Pop Warner, to playing some high school football and learning the game for yourself in the middle of South Central Pennsylvania, to going off to college to Syracuse and going to a big dome and watching the big guys play and understanding and liking the game, to coming back to having a Ravens team here in your adulthood, in your early childhood, quite frankly, because you're younger than me, and falling in love with the football team, and then having it be something you do every day for a living. living. There's a lot of football going on for a lot of people, and a lot of people have made a lot of sacrifices, including writing big checks to go to Tampa a generation ago or to go to New Orleans a couple of years ago to do it with us. And maybe they feel like it's all wrung out. Maybe they feel like they've gotten all they're going to get out of the Ravens at this point. I think I feel that way about the Orioles, for God's sake, that's for sure. And I often wonder, like, when a Yankees fan or when a Patriots fan has just sort of had enough, you know? I mean, like, it can't be as exciting to be a fan of the Patriots as it used to be. It just can't be. And I'd say that as a Ravens fan who's had a couple of parades around here and has seen a lot of Joe Flacco and John Harbaugh and understand that there's a fatigue about those guys just because they've been here for 10 years. But, you know, I still think 9-6 in a New Year's Eve game here against the Bengals is still good theater, and I think we've still seen great football games. Like the Pittsburgh game 2 weeks ago was as good a football game as you'll see. But I agree, the league has problems, the sport has problems, our society has problems. We have greed problems as a society in general that starts on Pennsylvania Avenue and works its way into the National Football League and into greedy pizza corporate guys who pop off their mouths about stuff, and sports radio show hosts who own a company here for 20 years and say, so if the football team falls, what happens to, like, the city and what happens to sports around here, and, you know, and why? And I would agree with you, and the Ghost of Football Future is coming this week, Luke, but I think a lot of this really is on somebody being much smarter at a higher level in the NFL, because every decision they've made this century, and last century, if you consider how Art Modell got here and how Georgia Frontiere wound up in St. Louis to begin with and how the Allers are playing in Nashville and McNair's in Houston, is that they have smelled the money, they have followed the money, and we are the money. You know, that my PSL is the money, and that's part of the money, as is the angry pizza guy in Louisville. But to bring the thing full circle, it can only get bigger and bigger and bigger, like Led Zeppelin, like Michael Jackson, like Hootie and the Blowfish, like Taylor Swift. You know, at some point, there's pushback. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People are going to start peeing on Ed Sheeran soon because he's playing stadiums all of a sudden and not clubs, right?
No, that's a great example. I mean, at some point, you sell out if you're a successful musician. I mean, that's just, there's a very short list of individuals or bands that never really got that reputation. I mean, and
Pearl Jam.
it just comes down to it. I mean, there's a certain amount of validity to that, and then sometimes it's just unfair. Again, I've said this to you with the Ravens, and I think it applies on the league-wide scale. So much of this is just cumulative. I think the anthem protest was kind of the gasoline on the fire, so to speak.
It was the shark jumper,
yeah.
Yes. There's no doubt about that.
But that said, I mean, some of these issues have been there for years. I mean, we've talked about rule changes. We've talked about flex scheduling. Certainly you and I have talked a lot about, frankly, it's not cheap to go to games. I mean, when you consider all the different factors. And I think that just builds up. And after a while, when you start seeing more and more of it and less regard for the fans, you know, at some point you do get tired of that. So I do think, and I've said this to you before, I don't think necessarily that this trend continues in the same way that it does. I think some of this is cyclical. I do think some people who have decided to stay away, specifically because of the protests, will be back, and I think a lot of those people have continued to watch on television. And look, it's their prerogative if they don't want to use their seats. I mean, that's their choice, or to sell them, or whatever they want to do. But you know, I've said since the middle of the season, you know, if the Ravens do make the playoffs and win a playoff game, and you know, go to New England or go to Pittsburgh and give the Patriots or the Steelers everything they can handle in the divisional round, and even if they lose by 3 points, you know, I think you see a lot of people feel a lot better about this team moving forward.
Now, they can lose and get in, right? I haven't figured the whole thing out, right?
Yeah, it basically, the Ravens have three things that can happen for them to be in the playoffs. Obviously, we know they need to win, or they can have a tie with the Bengals, and they're in the playoffs. Then
I'm not going to lie, I was pulling for a tie in the Patriots-Steelers thing just to figure out how it was going to screw everybody up.
Yeah,
it probably still would have been the same as a win for the Patriots, I guess, right?
Yeah, and then the other two scenarios, if the Ravens were to lose, they would be looking for, hopefully, Buffalo to lose at Miami, or they'd be looking for Tennessee to lose at home against Jacksonville, which we know Jacksonville doesn't have a whole lot, doesn't have anything to play for. So, those are the scenarios you're looking at. A Tennessee team playing a superior team that you wonder if they're going to be resting starters, and Buffalo, who at times has looked pretty decent, and other times they've looked terrible this year. But Buffalo going to Miami against the Dolphins team that is just a week or two removed from beating New England in their home stadium. So we'll see. Certainly you like having a couple fallback options, but you don't want to be relying on the fallback options. You want to win, and certainly.
Well, that's why they play these games simultaneously, so that you're not scoreboard watching.
And again,
per se, right?
I think the only rub here that fans can really have, because this is nothing new. This concept has been in place for a while now, but the only rub that I can empathize with is New Year's Eve, and not even so much someone having dinner reservations as much as 8 o'clock downtown. It could be a mess from a traffic standpoint, and that's where I do have some empathy for people. If that's going to cause you to stay away completely, then have at it, I suppose. I mean, that's your choice. At the end of the day, there are far bigger transgressions that the NFL has committed, but that said, it certainly isn't one of those points that helps the case against anyone saying that the league doesn't care at all about their fans actually going to games, because this is a case where instead of a 1 o'clock game where you can clear out of the harbor, get home, take a shower, go out to dinner, and get on with your New Year's Eve plans, it does expedite everything and does leave some logistical problems potentially downtown traffic come 8:30, 9 o'clock. So I get that. Again, to me, the only real part of it that I think you can really complain about is the fact that it's New Year's Eve. Does the league maybe need to look at some kind of a exception when
the league doesn't care, and that would be the heart of the whole issue, is the league doesn't care.
Well, and they don't, but then the league can't really say anything then if you have 20,000 no-shows in Nashville or Baltimore or Kansas City. I mean, the league has issues, and keep in mind, we've seen teams relocate over the last few years. I mean, this is, that's a perfect example of, and we know how that plays out in stadium and public funding and all of that for new stadiums elsewhere. But it's not really a sign of a league that's all that terribly healthy when you've had teams relocate, and we've had some of that here recently. So we'll see. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily doomsday or Armageddon for the Ravens or for the NFL by any stretch of the imagination, but there's certainly some issues here that should be addressed. I don't know if the league will address them, but yeah, I mean, this flex scheduling, it's nothing new, but I think with it being on New Year's, it's a little more highlighted on top of all the other things that fans, both locally and on a league-wide schedule, are not happy with.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. You can follow him out on Twitter. We'll be out in Owings Mills all week during this very strange sort of holiday week between Christmas and New Year's, getting ready. And, Luke, I must tip my cap to you. I mean, I thought if the Ravens could be the 6.1 seed or the 6.5 seed or something that just wasn't the 7 seed, that I would have been happy to go to the 3 seed. And you were 3-4 weeks ago saying, well, they can still be the 5 seed. And I'm like, come on, dude. They're going to be lucky to be the 6 seed. They're going to be lucky to not be the 7 or the 8 seed on the outside golfing at this point, especially after the hiccup to the Steelers.
Yeah.
But, lo and behold, this 5 seed thing, and it's a good problem to have, to be sitting here saying, do we want to go to Kansas City and eat barbecue next week, or do we want to go to Jacksonville and sit in the pool? Because either one of these draws, we'll be sitting here a week from now if they can get through the Cincinnati game or get some help, or what. As long as they're playing next week, I will believe as I get on a plane for Kansas City or Jacksonville that they can win that game, whatever that game is.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And when I made those comments a few weeks ago, it wasn't really complimenting the Ravens as much as it was looking at Tennessee's final schedule and say, you know what, I know the Titans beat the Ravens back in November. I'm not saying that the Ravens are markedly better than the Tennessee Titans, but I'll tell you this, I'm not buying the Titans being an 11-win team, and that ended up coming to fruition. I mean, again, and we've talked about this going all the way back to October and going to the bye week when the Ravens were 4-5, and we were saying at the time that, hey, the season's not over. I mean, you can stomp your feet all you want and say the Ravens stink and they're not going anywhere, and maybe you'll be right, but every other team that they were competing with was having that same conversation, its fan base, talking about that team not being very good. So, it's really a product of that. It's a product of the Ravens finding some semblance of an offensive identity, as the offense has been much better over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Certainly, the schedule has been a benefit. There's no question about that. But it all comes down to the Ravens finding some level of consistency. Even if it hasn't been great, it's certainly been more consistent than we saw early in the season. And they've had an easier schedule. There's no way to hide from that. I mean, I don't think it should completely dismiss the fact that they've won 5 out of 6, but it's certainly a factor. I mean, my goodness. I mean, you look at this team right now. They have one win over a team that has a winning record through the first 16 weeks of the season, and that's the Detroit Lions, who aren't going to be in the playoffs. So, you have to acknowledge that, but at the same time, they can't. It's not as though they need to apologize for their record. There's unknown there, but at the same time, there are lots of teams that have lost to mediocre to bad teams, and some teams have really shot themselves in the foot, losing to a bad team. So, if you can at least win the games you're supposed to, you're going to find yourself still standing in Week 17, having a chance, and that's where the Ravens find themselves. And yeah, it'd be great to be talking about them having a first-round bye or home field advantage throughout, or at the very least a division title in a home playoff game. But you'll still take 9-6 over being 5-11 or 5-10 right now, and asking, is this John Harbaugh's last game? Asking if this is the beginning of the end for Joe Flacco here in Baltimore.
Or Ozzie Newsome, by the
way.
Or
Ozzie Newsome, or anyone in the front office. I mean, if you miss the playoffs for the 4th time in 5 years, I mean, that's, you kind of get into that territory where, all right, what's Steve Bisciotti going to do?
Well, you're the Buffalo Bills at that point almost, literally, right? Or you're the Detroit Lions at that point.
It's not quite that dire, but from the fan base, from the perspective of a fan base that's already not going to games, that's, you do wonder. So that's that's the fear in the back of your mind if the Ravens go out on Sunday and lay an egg, and Buffalo and Tennessee both win, which I don't think it's impossible that both those teams win on Sunday. So the Ravens need to win. It's that simple. You can't be relying on another scenario where you just back into the playoffs, and that's the one thing I would say I disagree with you a little bit from a perception standpoint. If they were to lose against Cincinnati, and on the heels of not exactly looking all that impressive against Indy,
go play next week,
and then you're going to go to Jacksonville or Kansas City. Now, they still could win, because I don't think Jacksonville. I think Jacksonville at times has looked really, really good.
Oh, Bortles is going to give them the ball 2 or 3 times down there if we go and play, right?
And you would think.
Well, the ball's going to go up in the air. I mean, let's put it to you that way. The Ravens will have opportunities to change the game on the back end, and opportunities to get after him and probably stuff their run. Now, how the Ravens could look against their defense.
Yeah.
That's a whole. We saw that in London, and that was a long flight home for Joe Flacco and John Harbaugh and Terrell Suggs and all of those guys after getting their ass kicked over there. I would think that there'd be no thought that they couldn't get up for that game. That they remember that day pretty well.
Oh, no question, no question. And again, if the Ravens were to back into the playoffs, so to speak, that's not to say they couldn't beat either of those teams on the road. I just think the perception would be, people would be down on them. Whether you're talking about pundits or fans, which at the end of the day, do either of those groups really matter when it comes to how the Ravens actually would fare in the first round of the playoffs? No. I'm just telling you that would certainly cool enthusiasm to a great degree. And I'm talking beyond
the line a
people
point
going to the games. Just talking about people talking about them, people wearing their Festivus T-shirts, all of that. That would certainly be tempered. And look, hey, you lose to Cincinnati, or they lose to Cincinnati and sneak into the playoffs, I'll be a little more down on them than I would be, otherwise talking about a win and going to either Jacksonville or Kansas City.
All right, you can always find us out on the BuyAToyota.com audio vault. We got baseball stuff. We're going to talk more about Manny Machado and the Orioles and the offseason, as well as the ghost of Baltimore football, past, present, and soon to be future, out at WNST.net. You can find our morning newspaper under your tree, or really in your email inbox for free. It's delivered digitally. It's free to sign up. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness. $10 a month, never any commitment. We're getting up on 2018 this week, so you'll want to get out to Planet Fitness and work out. Don't forget, Dennis Colatzos will be here on Thursday driving you home. It is the SSV on WNST, as brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard, where when Manny Machado is not dealt, as I predicted a month or 2 or 3 or 6 ago, you will not get that WNST text. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. But if they deal a Zach Britton, well, they're not going to deal him either. So, well, whatever the Orioles do, you'll get it first on the WNST text service. Nasty at WNST.net reaches me. I am on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. And at some point, I may even turn the light on my Festivus T-shirt. Yeah, there we go. I have my Festivus holiday garb on today for our video cameras. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.